What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be going through all of the details of the weapon balancing for multiplayer that we got a couple days ago in Black Ops 4. This was a massive update, so just keep in mind with this video, this is only going to be covering the weapons and only going to be covering the changes for multiplayer. There were also changes to perks and specialists and equipment and things like that. I plan on making a separate video to cover those changes. So let's hop right into the changes for the assault rifles. The first thing that got changed was the Rampart 17, for whatever reason, got a slight range buff to its maximum damage. And as you can see here, that means the 4-shot kill range will now extend to 37.5 meters. And I feel like this buff was completely unnecessary since the Rampart I always felt was a really powerful gun with the right attachments anyways. But now it's even a little bit more powerful. We see a similar story with the KN57. This one also got a buff to its 4-shot kill range, or its maximum damage range, from about 12.5 meters up to roughly 15 meters. This is a great change in my opinion. I really liked the KN57 even before this update, so this little buff to the maximum damage range is going to make it just that little bit better. And if you guys haven't used the KN57 lately, I highly encourage you to give it a go because I feel it is super underrated. It actually has the fastest time to kill in the assault rifle category within that 4-shot kill range that it has. So in my opinion, this is now one of the better assault rifles in the game. This brings us to the Vapor, and the Vapor also got a range buff. As you can see here, they buffed its 5-shot kill range from roughly 30 meters all the way up to a little bit over 40 meters. This is actually a pretty big difference in its range values. In addition to that though, they also reduced the idle sway on the Vapor, and this is very noticeable. The Vapor after this update has practically no idle sway anymore, so it's going to be much better at those longer ranges. Moving on to the Maddox, this one got quite a few changes. The first thing you'll notice is they nerfed the recoil a little bit on the first 5 shots. This particular nerf is somewhat noticeable, you can feel it, although I would still say the recoil is pretty easy to control for the Maddox. As for the Echo Fire Operator mod on the Maddox, they actually reduced the recoil on this, and this is quite noticeable. You can see it very clearly here. It has noticeably less recoil. And finally, for the recoil on the Maddox, they added recoil while using the ELO sight, and this is also quite noticeable. You can see here that the ELO sight is no longer a good option to use on the Maddox, and therefore I would just recommend using a reflex instead. Now, another thing they stated in the patch notes is that they nerfed Quick Draw on the Maddox, and with Quick Draw 1, even though the patch notes say that it nerfed it, on consoles which run at 60 FPS, there is no detectable change whatsoever in your aim down sight time. Although with Quick Draw 2, you can definitely tell a difference here. The aim down sight time with Quick Draw 2 before the patch was around 160 milliseconds, and after the patch, it's just 1 frame slower at about 175 milliseconds. In addition to that, with the Maddox, they nerfed the stock strafe speed from 69% down to 64%. So definitely a nerf, but a relatively small reduction. Now, one last thing that changed with the Maddox that only applies to the console build of the game, this one doesn't apply to PC, is they slightly nerfed its 5-shot kill range, and as you can see there, it was a relatively minor change. So while these individual changes have been quite small to the Maddox, when you add them all together, it really does hamper the effectiveness of this gun. And I don't think it's going to be that really dominant assault rifle anymore. I think we're going to see a lot less of the Maddox in competitive play, although I would still say it's a very viable gun in public matches, just don't use that ELO sight. This brings us to the SMGs, and I just wanted to cover all of the range changes at once with the SMGs. For the MX-9, it got a slight buff to its 5-shot kill range, which is definitely noticeable, and that's going to help that gun out a decent amount. The GKS also got a very small buff to its 5-shot kill range. This one was a smaller increase because it started off with a lower range. The Spitfire got a little bit of a nerf to its 6-shot kill range, which is relatively noticeable. And finally, the Damon got a very slight buff to its 6-shot kill range. Getting into some of the specifics with the SMGs, the MX-9 got a buff to its standard aim down sight time, which is great to see. It used to be 250 milliseconds, and it's now dropped all the way down to 215 milliseconds, which is very noticeable. For the Spitfire, they nerfed the stock attachment. It used to give you an aim down sight strafe speed of 90%. That has reduced very slightly down to 87.5%. For extended mags, they also nerfed that from 50 rounds down to 45 rounds per magazine while using that attachment. And finally, the patch notes state that the fast mag attachment got a nerf to its reload speed. However, that change goes from 0.88 seconds to 0.89 seconds. So realistically speaking, you won't notice a difference with the fast mag attachment. This brings us to the Cordite, and the first thing they did with the Cordite is they slightly nerfed the grip attachment on this gun. And as you can see here, it's not really a big noticeable change by any means. It's got a decent amount of recoil before the patch as well as after the patch, but just know you've got a bit more recoil now if you're using grip on the Cordite. As for the belt-fed operator mod, this was really confusing when I first read the patch notes. I didn't understand it, and it still doesn't make sense in the patch notes. But essentially what they did to the belt-fed operator mod is pre-patch you were able to fire 65 rounds without stopping before you overheated the gun. Now you're only able to fire 54 rounds before you start to overheat. The actual amount of time it takes to cool down after you've overheated is still exactly the same. Moving on to the SOG 9mm, we've got quite a few nerfs to this. First up, they nerfed the sprint out time from 200 milliseconds down to 250 milliseconds, so now it's in line with pretty much all of the other SMGs, whereas before, it used to be the fastest in the SMG category for some reason. The patch notes also state that the base movement speed has been reduced to match the other SMGs, but when I did my testing pre-patch, it didn't appear to be any different in the first place, so I don't think this is something you guys are going to notice, because even with my frame-by-frame testing, I couldn't really tell a difference in the movement speed. As for the stock attachment on the SOG, if you're using just one stock attachment, they've reduced the aim down sight movement speed from 90% down to 87.5%, which is a very, very minor change. But if you're using stock 2, they've also nerfed that from 100% down to 95%. As for the grip attachment on the SOG, this also got a very slight nerf, and just like with the Cordite, it's a very minor change. Yes, it does appear to be slightly less accurate than it was before, but it's not that big of a change. So that's it for the SMGs. Now let's move on to tactical rifles, and we have quite a few changes in this area. For the Auger DMR, it got increased aim down sight movement speed from 40% up to 42.5%, which is a really slight difference, and I don't think you'll really notice much in that area. Also, it got an increase to its maximum fire rate, which is definitely noticeable if you have a decent trigger finger. This went from 328 rounds per minute all the way up to 362 rounds per minute. And just to give you a better indication of this difference, just have a listen to the pre-patch and post-patch auger firing at the maximum fire rate. So definitely a noticeable change, and that's really big for the auger because it was already a very solid gun before this patch, especially when you have both high caliber attachments on, and now it's even more deadly than it was before. In addition to this, they also improved the fire rate slightly with the double tap operator mod on the auger. And once again, I'll just let you guys have a listen to this. It's really difficult to test the actual fire rate within each burst at 60 FPS on consoles, and therefore I don't have the exact values for you, but you can definitely see a little bit of a difference in the fire rate here. Moving on to the ABR, they also increased the movement speed for the ABR from 40% up to 42.5%, just like with the Auger DMR. And in addition to that, they improved the sprint out speed from 300 milliseconds down to roughly 260 milliseconds. Neither of these changes are particularly noticeable, which is a bit disappointing for the ABR because in multiplayer at least, I still feel like this gun is just underwhelming. This just leaves us with the Swordfish in the tactical rifle category, and with this also got the same buff to its aim down sight movement speed from 40% up to 42.5%, and also the patch notes state that the Quick Draw 2 attachment got a little bit of a buff. However, in my testing, once again, on console at 60 FPS, I was getting the exact same value pre-patch and post-patch, and therefore Quick Draw 2, realistically speaking, wasn't changed at all with this update. This brings us to the LMG category, and this is the big nerf that a lot of people have been looking for, the Titan. The Titan was nerfed in a few different ways. First off, the maximum damage was decreased from 46 all the way down to 38. Now what this means is in a standard gunfight, player versus player, it's still going to be a 4-shot kill just like it was before this update. So most of the time, you won't really notice a difference with the Titan against another player. However, there are exceptions. The one exception is you can no longer get a 3-shot headshot, whereas before the update, if you hit all 3 bullets to the head, you would be able to get a 3-shot kill. And also against somebody using armor, if you're not using FMJ on the Titan, it will take you that extra shot to kill, whereas pre-patch, it didn't matter at all. And finally, when looking at fights against other players, if the enemy player has their health boosted by crash, pre-patch, it would take you 1 extra shot to kill that player, whereas post-patch, it's now going to take you 2 extra shots to kill that player. Now, the much more noticeable aspect of this damage decrease with the Titan is going to involve the Titan versus score streaks. It will now take you roughly 15 to 20% extra time to take out a streak while using the Titan, even if you're using the FMJ2 attachment. So while you can still take an attack chopper out fairly quickly with the Titan with FMJ2, it will take you a little bit longer than it did before the patch. In addition to that nerf, the stock attachment was nerfed on the Titan, so your aim down sight trace speed with the stock before this patch was 59%. That has now been reduced all the way down to 53%. So this is quite noticeable, and I think a great change to the stock attachment. And finally for the Titan, this just leaves us with the flinch nerf. And as you can see here, you will be flinching a little bit more now after this patch, which I think is definitely going to be helpful, especially at those longer ranges. If you manage to hit some shots on a Titan user as he's shooting towards you, you will be able to flinch him off target a bit more effectively. This brings us into the sniper rifles, and for console only, the Outlaw got a little bit of a buff to its fire rate. It used to fire at 88 rounds per minute, and post-patch it will now fire at 90 rounds per minute, so a relatively minor change, but it might help you in a few situations. As for the Koshka, one change that I really liked for this sniper rifle is they have reduced its idle sway by a noticeable amount. Now, it still does have a decent amount of idle sway, so it's not like it's suddenly laser accurate without holding your breath, but it is much better than it was before, and this is definitely a welcome change for me. In addition to that, with the Koshka on console only, with Quick Draw 2, they've improved its aim down sight time from 250 milliseconds, which is the same as most SMGs, down to 200 milliseconds, which is now faster than the SMGs. I really don't understand the need for this change. I think that one was definitely overkill. I think the idle sway change was more than enough. But that's it for the sniper rifles. We also got a change to one of the pistols though, and this is the RK7 Garrison. This buff has been a long time coming, and what they did is they improved all of the damage ranges by a very noticeable amount. As you can see, the 5-shot, 6-shot, and 7-shot kill ranges have all improved by quite a noticeable margin, and this is going to help the gun out a ton in both core as well as hardcore game modes. So this just leaves us with the shotguns, and the first thing we'll have a look at is the MOG 12. With this gun, the first thing they did is they increased the maximum damage range a little bit, which does improve your one-shot kill potential without attachments. As you can see, it's a relatively slight improvement, but it is nice to see some improvement to that one-shot kill potential. Also, on console only, if you're using the barrel choke, they've improved the accuracy, pellet damage, as well as the maximum damage range, which, as you can see there, you once again get a very slight increase to your one-shot kill potential, assuming every one of the pellets is hitting. This just leaves us with the Dragon's Breath Operator mod on the MOG 12, and with this, what they've done is pre-patch. It used to take about a second or two after you shot your enemy before that burn damage would kick in and finish them off. Now it kicks in nearly immediately, and therefore if you just touch somebody with the Dragon's Breath and you have the choke attachment on as well, you're almost guaranteed to get an instant one-shot kill. This has made the MOG 12 an extremely viable one-shot kill shotgun within core game modes, and I expect to see quite a few more of these running around. So finally, the last weapon change with this update for multiplayer is with the SG12 Operator mod, which is that strobe light. All they've done with this is they've reduced the brightness of that strobe. So it still disables your aim assist exactly the same way as it did before. It's just not quite as bright as it was before. And with that, we're going to wrap up today's video on all of the multiplayer weapon balancing changes that we saw with the February 19th update. I'm really interested to hear in the comment section below, what did you guys think of the weapon balancing with this update? Do you think overall the changes were good for the game, bad for the game? Are you kind of mixed? Like, do you like some of these changes but dislike others? Just let me know what you guys are thinking down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.
Yeah.